The winter of 1872 hit the northern Rocky Mountain foothills without mercy. Jakub Novak learned that when his cabin interior dropped to 8 degrees Fahrenheit while he burned through 2 full cords of pine in 10 days. He had built his chimney exactly like every homesteader in Montana Territory: straight brick flue, simple firebox, fast draft up and out. Standard frontier wisdom that left him shivering beside his own fireplace. Across the valley, settlers fought the same losing battle with chimneys built by the book and failing by the season. Over 3 years, Novak quietly developed what he called his Zig-Zag Masonry Flue, keeping his home 40 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than neighbors' cabins and cutting fuel use in half. What did he understand about heat flow that every frontier builder was missing? The northern Rocky Mountain foothills stretched like a frozen maze of lodgepole pine and Douglas fir, where winter settled in November and didn't lift its grip until April. Elevation ran between 4,000 and 6,000 feet, high enough that overnight temperatures regularly plunged 20 degrees below zero, and wind off the Continental Divide could drive snow horizontally through any gap in a cabin's defenses. This was country that demanded respect, where a poorly built shelter meant death, and where every homesteader learned to measure survival in cords of wood and degrees of warmth. Jakub Novak had arrived in the territory 3 years earlier, carrying the skills of a carpenter and mason trained in the Austrian provinces of Galicia. Back in the old country, winters lasted 6 months, and every village builder knew the secrets of thick-walled masonry heaters that could warm a house for days on a single firing. But Montana Territory operated by different rules, or so the established settlers insisted. The frontier building guides were clear: construct a simple fireplace with a straight brick chimney, let the smoke rise fast and direct, keep the flue clean and the draft strong. Local masons who had been laying brick for a decade swore by the method, and it made sense from a practical standpoint. Straight up meant less brick, less labor, less time away from the urgent work of clearing land and planting crops. Every cabin in the valley followed the same blueprint. William Harper, the county road overseer who had supervised dozens of homestead builds, preached the gospel of the single straight flue. Build your firebox wide and deep, he told newcomers. Run your chimney straight up through the roof peak and trust the natural draft to pull smoke clear. The Territorial Building Manual, printed in Helena and distributed to every land office, devoted exactly 2 pages to chimney construction and recommended nothing more complex than a standard 6-foot vertical stack with 8-inch interior dimensions. The method failed spectacularly that first winter. Thomas Baker, whose homestead bordered Novak's claim to the east, watched. His interior temperature dropped to 15 degrees Fahrenheit on a January night when he had burned a full cord of split pine in just 3 days. The straight chimney pulled heat up and out so efficiently that the brick walls barely warmed to the touch, and by dawn the firebox was cold stone. Margaret Collins, a widow homesteading with her 2 sons 8 miles north, cracked her firebox completely when January brought 2 weeks of 40 below zero temperatures. The repeated heating and cooling split the masonry, and she spent her precious savings hiring Harper's crew to rebuild the entire hearth in February. Worse than the fuel waste was the smoke problem. During heavy snow or when atmospheric pressure dropped, the straight chimneys lost their draft entirely. Smoke backed into living spaces, forcing families to choose between freezing or suffocating. Samuel Morrison, a veteran of 3 Montana winters, abandoned his cabin for 4 days in early February when a temperature inversion trapped smoke at ground level and his chimney became a liability instead of a lifeline. Novak watched his neighbors struggle and remembered the Galician villages of his childhood where massive brick stoves called kafle radiated heat for 12 hours after the fire died. Those old country heaters used labyrinthine flue paths that forced hot gases to wind through channels of masonry before finally venting to the sky. The principle was simple. The longer the hot smoke stayed in contact with brick mass, the more heat transferred from gas to stone, and the longer that stone radiated warmth into the living space. European masons had refined these techniques over centuries, building systems that extracted every possible British thermal unit from burning wood. But when Novak suggested modifications to the standard frontier design, The response was swift and dismissive. Harper called his sketches overcomplicated immigrant nonsense and warned other settlers that foreign building methods were poorly suited to American conditions. The extra bricks would cost money that homesteaders didn't have, Harper argued, and the additional labor would delay cabin completion when every day counted toward winter preparation. Several neighbors mocked Novak's drawings as the product of old-world thinking that had no place on the Montana frontier. The skepticism ran deeper than mere practicality. To established settlers like Harper, the frontier represented a clean break from European traditions, a place where American ingenuity could improve on ancient methods. Novak's proposals seemed like a step backward, a rejection of the pioneering spirit that had built the territory. Why complicate a working system with foreign ideas when the straight chimney had served adequately for years? But Novak had lived through too many cold mornings to accept adequacy. He began experimenting quietly on his own cabin, adding mass around the firebox and extending the internal flue path. His early modifications were crude approximations of the European systems he remembered, built more from intuition than precise engineering. He increased the thickness of his hearth base, constructed channels that forced smoke to travel horizontally before rising, and embedded portions of the masonry deeper into the earth to reduce heat loss to the frozen ground. The conflict crystallized into a fundamental disagreement about heat and efficiency. The established frontier wisdom treated fire as a short-term solution to cold. Burn wood, create flames, push smoke away quickly, repeat as needed. Novak's approach viewed fire as fuel for a thermal storage system. Capture heat in mass, release it slowly over time, minimize waste through careful design. One philosophy prioritized speed and simplicity, the other emphasized patience and complexity. The difference would soon prove itself in measurable terms that no amount of skepticism could dismiss. Spring brought the opportunity for reconstruction. Novak spent March sketching plans that would transform his cabin's heating foundation from the ground up, literally. The standard frontier hearth consisted of a thin layer of fieldstone or basic brick, barely 4 inches thick, sitting on a simple stone pier foundation. This minimal approach saved materials and labor, but it also meant that once the evening fire burned down to coals, the shallow masonry cooled within hours, taking the interior warmth with it. Novak's solution drew from memories of his childhood in Galicia, where village masons built what they called the fundament, massive brick platforms that formed the foundation of every masonry heater. These weren't decorative features, but functional thermal batteries, designed to absorb tremendous amounts of heat and release it slowly over 12 to 18 hours. A proper fundament used double-withe construction, meaning 2 separate walls of brick laid side by side, with mortar filling the gap between them. This created a solid mass 12 inches thick that could store exponentially more heat than thin single-layer masonry. Construction began in early April, when the ground thawed enough for excavation. Novak dug his hearth foundation 18 inches deeper than frontier standards required, creating a cavity that would accommodate both the thick brick platform and its partial embedding into the earth. The excavated area measured 8 feet by 6 feet, large enough to support a hearth that would extend 6 feet out from the firebox into the living space of the cabin. This extension wasn't ornamental, it represented thermal mass positioned where it could radiate heat directly into the room rather than losing it to the cabin's exterior walls. The double-withe technique required precise coordination of 2 separate masonry courses. Novak laid the first course of fire bricks along the perimeter, then immediately placed a second parallel course 4 inches inward, filling the space between with lime mortar mixed with crushed stone. Each subsequent layer repeated this pattern, creating interlocking thermal mass that eliminated weak points where heat could escape. The process consumed nearly 2,000 pounds of brick, triple the amount used in standard frontier hearths, but the result was a solid platform capable of storing enormous amounts of thermal energy. During this construction phase, Novak encountered Chief Squela, a Kootenai elder who had observed the immigrants' unusual building project with growing interest. The elder approached one evening as Novak worked by lamplight, smoothing the mortar joints on his 4th course of brickwork. Through a combination of broken English and hand gestures, Squilha explained how his people had built winter shelters for generations using a principle he called ground warm, partially burying heavy floor platforms so they could draw a stable earth temperature and store heat more effectively. Squilha led Novak to the remains of an old pit house site, deeper in the valley, where cedar log platforms had been set 18 inches into the earth and covered with stone slabs. Even decades after abandonment, these buried platforms retained noticeably more warmth than surface structures. The elder explained that earth temperatures 6 inches below the surface remained nearly constant at around 45 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the Montana winter, while surface materials fluctuated wildly with air temperature. A buried thermal mass could use this stable ground temperature as its baseline, making it far more efficient at storing and releasing heat. Novak modified his design to incorporate this indigenous wisdom. Instead of building his massive hearth platform entirely above ground, he embedded the lower half of the 12-inch thickness directly into the excavated foundation, surrounding it with packed earth and gravel. This created a thermal anchor that connected his brick mass to the stable temperature of the ground below, reducing heat loss during the coldest nights and providing a reservoir of moderate temperature that would slow the platform's cooling. The construction revealed another practical challenge that frontier builders had never addressed. Traditional thin hearths were easy to clean because ash fell through simple grates onto bare earth below the firebox. But Novak's massive embedded platform blocked access to the space beneath the fire, creating a potential maintenance nightmare. Drawing on techniques he had observed in Galician village workshops, he incorporated a removable ash cleanout system into his design. This innovation required embedding a series of narrow clay channels into the lower courses of the brick platform, creating passages that connected the ash pit beneath the firebox to accessible openings on the platform's sides. Removable ceramic plates covered these openings, allowing Novak to extract accumulated ash without dismantling any masonry. The channels also improved heat transfer by allowing hot gases from the fire to circulate through more of the thermal mass, rather than rising directly up through the center of the platform. By late May, Novak's reconstruction was complete. The finished hearth platform presented a dramatically different appearance from standard frontier installations. Where neighbors had thin brick surfaces that measured perhaps 24 inches square, Novak's installation dominated one entire wall of his cabin interior. The platform's surface area totaled 48 square feet, all of it 12-inch thick double-wide masonry capable of storing heat. 6 feet of this platform projected into the living space, positioning massive thermal mass exactly where it could radiate warmth most effectively to the cabin's occupants. The first test came during an unexpected cold snap in early June, when overnight temperatures dropped to 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Novak built a modest fire using 1 cord of seasoned pine, maintaining it for approximately 4 hours before banking the coals and retiring for the night. At dawn, he used a simple mercury thermometer to measure surface temperatures across his new installation. The platform's surface registered 140 degrees Fahrenheit near the firebox and 110 degrees even at its furthest extension into the room. Meanwhile, Thomas Baker's conventional thin hearth showed surface temperatures of only 70 degrees near its firebox and ambient room temperature everywhere else. The thermal performance translated into measurable comfort differences. Novak's cabin interior measured 52 degrees Fahrenheit at dawn, while Baker's had dropped to 38 degrees despite burning a comparable amount of wood. More significantly, Novak's massive platform continued radiating detectable heat throughout the following day, maintaining interior temperatures above 45 degrees without any additional fuel. The embedded design had created exactly the thermal battery effect that Galician masons had refined over centuries, now adapted to Montana frontier conditions with indigenous earth coupling techniques that enhanced its performance beyond even old world standards. Summer brought the critical second phase of Novak's heating revolution, redesigning the pathway that hot gases traveled from firebox to sky. While his massive thermal platform could store tremendous amounts of heat, that storage meant nothing if the heat escaped through the chimney before the masonry could capture it. Standard frontier chimneys functioned like express highways for hot smoke, rushing combustion gases upward and outward as quickly as possible. This rapid evacuation prevented dangerous backdrafts, but it also sent most of the fire's energy straight into the atmosphere. Novak planned to build what European masons called a labyrinth flue, a deliberately tortuous path that forced hot gases to win through multiple channels within the chimney stack before finally venting to the outside air. The concept violated every principle of frontier chimney design, which prioritized straight vertical drafts and unobstructed smoke removal. But Galician heating systems had used labyrinth flues for centuries, creating internal mazes that extracted maximum heat from combustion gases before allowing them to escape. Construction of the internal flue system began in July, when Novak started laying the brick courses that would rise above his completed thermal platform. Instead of building a simple hollow square that would contain a straight vertical channel, he created a complex internal structure that divided the chimney's interior into multiple interconnected passages. The design resembled a vertical letter S, with hot gases forced to travel up from the firebox, then sideways and down through a descending channel, then up again through a second ascending passage before finally exiting at the roof. This serpentine pathway increased the total distance that hot gases traveled from firebox to sky from 6 feet to nearly 15 feet, while keeping the chimney's external dimensions identical to standard frontier installations. The magic happened within the brick walls, where carefully planned baffles and channels guided combustion gases through maximum contact with masonry surfaces. Every foot of additional travel translated into more heat transfer from gas to brick and more thermal energy stored in the mass that surrounded the flue. The technical challenge lay in maintaining adequate draft while creating deliberate restrictions to gas flow. Novak solved this by carefully calculating the cross-sectional area of each channel segment. The descending passage measured 8 inches by 10 inches, providing sufficient volume for gas flow while creating enough restriction to slow the gases and maximize heat exchange. Too narrow, and the system would create dangerous backdrafts. Too wide, and gases would rush through without transferring significant heat to the surrounding masonry. The most complex element was the lower bend where ascending gases reversed direction to begin their descent through the second channel. This junction required precise masonry work to create smooth transitions that wouldn't trap ash or create turbulence that could disrupt the entire draft system. Novak built removable access panels into this critical junction, allowing future cleaning and maintenance of the bend where soot and debris would inevitably accumulate. During construction, Chief Squilha visited again, studying the emerging flue system with evident interest. The elder drew comparisons to techniques his people used for smoking fish and preserving meat, where controlled airflow through winding passages created even heat distribution and prevented hot spots. He described this principle using the phrase water in the logs, referring to how a sap moved slowly through wood grain rather than rushing directly through hollow channels. Squilla's insight led to another crucial modification. He observed that during calm weather, or when the chimney was cold, the labyrinth flue might not generate sufficient draft to start properly. His solution was elegantly simple: a small cold air feed vent installed at the base of the chimney stack. This vent could be opened to allow outside air to enter the flue system directly, creating initial draft that would pull combustion gases through the labyrinth until the masonry warmed and natural draft took over. The cold air feed represented a fundamental departure from standard chimney design, which sealed the flue system completely except for the firebox opening and roof exit. Novak's system now included a third controlled opening that could regulate airflow and draft pressure. During normal operation, the cold air vent remained closed, forcing all draft through the firebox. But during startup or when atmospheric conditions created weak draft, opening the vent provided the additional airflow needed to establish proper gas circulation through the serpentine channels. By late August, the completed flue system was ready for testing. The first firing revealed immediate differences from standard chimney performance. Where conventional straight flues showed visible heat shimmer and intense thermal updraft at the roof exit, Novak's labyrinth system produced barely detectable exhaust heat. Using a simple iron rod to test temperatures, he found that gases exiting his chimney measured approximately 70 degrees Fahrenheit above ambient temperature, compared to over 400 degrees excess temperature measured at Thomas Baker's conventional chimney operating under identical conditions. The dramatic reduction in exhaust temperature proved that the labyrinth flue was capturing heat that would otherwise escape. Internal temperature measurements confirmed the system's effectiveness. After firing the system for 1 hour using 1 quart of seasoned fir, then allowing it to burn down naturally, Novak measured brick temperatures throughout the chimney stack. Even 18 hours after the fire had died completely, internal masonry surfaces registered 150 degrees Fahrenheit, while the exterior chimney walls remained warm to the touch at heights of 8 feet above the hearth platform. The heat retention translated into measurable improvements in cabin comfort and fuel efficiency. During a September cold snap that brought overnight temperatures down to 25 degrees Fahrenheit, Novak's system maintained interior temperatures above 40 degrees throughout the night, using approximately 60% of the fuel that neighboring cabins required for equivalent warmth. The Labyrinth Flue had transformed his heating system from a simple wood-burning appliance into a sophisticated thermal management device that extracted maximum energy from every piece of firewood. Thomas Baker, initially skeptical of Novak's elaborate construction project, visited repeatedly during the fall testing period to observe the system's performance. He measured soot accumulation in both chimneys, finding that Novak's labyrinth design produced significantly less creosote buildup despite the longer gas pathway. The lower exhaust temperatures reduced the chemical reactions that created dangerous chimney deposits, making the complex system actually safer than conventional straight flues. The Labyrinth Flue had solved the fundamental inefficiency of frontier heating, the waste of thermal energy through rapid smoke evacuation. By forcing hot gases to surrender their heat to masonry mass before escaping, Novak had created a system that captured nearly 85% of combustion energy, compared to roughly 50% captured by standard straight flue designs. October revealed a hidden weakness in even the most sophisticated heating systems. As autumn temperatures fluctuated between warm days and freezing nights, Novak discovered that his powerful thermal mass and efficient flue created an unexpected problem: stagnant air that trapped moisture and created condensation throughout his cabin. The massive brick platform radiated steady heat, but without proper air circulation, humid air from cooking, breathing, and daily activities settled into cold corners where it condensed on walls and ceiling timbers. Frost formed on interior surfaces during the coldest nights, and by morning, a thin film of ice coated the cabin's wooden walls wherever they contacted outside air. The moisture problem plagued frontier cabins throughout the territory, but most settlers addressed it by simply opening doors and windows periodically to exchange inside air with outside air. This crude ventilation wasted enormous amounts of heated air and forced heating systems to work harder to maintain comfortable temperatures. Margaret Collins reported losing entire days of accumulated heat when she opened her cabin windows to clear condensation, and several neighbors complained of warped ceiling boards and rotting wall timbers caused by trapped moisture. Chief Squilla observed Novak's condensation problem during a November visit and described how traditional pit houses managed air circulation without losing heat. Kootenai builders created passive ventilation systems using natural air pressure differences and carefully positioned openings that moved fresh air through living spaces while preserving thermal energy. The elder sketched in the dirt outside Novak's cabin, showing how low intake vents drew cool outside air into the structure, while high exhaust vents allowed warm, moisture-laden air to escape, creating natural circulation that prevented stagnation. The indigenous approach relied on the principle that warm air rises and cool air sinks, creating natural pressure differences that could drive air circulation without mechanical assistance. By positioning intake vents near ground level on the side of the structure opposite the heat source, and exhaust vents high on the wall near the heat source, builders could establish airflow patterns that continuously refreshed interior air while minimizing heat loss. Squilla emphasized that the key was controlling the size and timing of these ventilation openings to match seasonal conditions. Novak incorporated this wisdom into his heating system by cutting a controlled intake vent low on the north wall of his cabin, opposite his massive thermal platform. The vent measured 4 inches by 6 inches and included a sliding wooden panel that allowed precise control of airflow volume. Cool outside air entered through this opening, was warmed by contact with the heated brick platform, rose toward the cabin's ceiling, and created circulation that prevented moisture from accumulating in stagnant air pockets. but the indigenous ventilation concept needed modification to work with Novak's European-style masonry system. Simply exhausting warm air through high vents would waste the thermal energy that his labyrinth flue had worked so hard to capture. The solution came from memories of Central European masonry heaters that included heat recovery ventilation, systems that captured heat from exhaust air before it left the building. Novak designed what he called a heat recovery passage, a narrow channel built into the masonry wall behind his thermal platform. This passage measured 4 inches wide and extended from floor to ceiling, creating a vertical chamber that surrounded the backside of his heated brick mass. Room air could enter this passage through openings near the floor, travel upward while being warmed by contact with the heated masonry, and exit through openings at mid-wall height back into the living space. The heat recovery passage functioned like a natural convection heater, drawing cool room air from floor level, warming it against the hot brick surfaces, and returning it to the room at a comfortable temperature. This created continuous air circulation that prevented stagnation while actually increasing the effective heating capacity of the thermal mass. Instead of radiating heat only from its front surface into the room, the massive brick platform now heated air flowing through the rear passage as well, doubling its heat transfer capacity. Installation of the heat recovery system required careful integration with the existing masonry structure. Novak built the rear passage during the original construction of his thermal platform, creating a 4-inch gap between the main brick mass and the cabin's log wall. This gap was lined with thin fire bricks to create smooth airflow surfaces and connected to the room through carefully positioned openings that could be controlled with adjustable metal dampers. The seasonal control aspect proved crucial for year-round performance. During deep winter, when outside temperatures remained well below zero, Novak kept the intake vent nearly closed and relied primarily on the heat recovery passage for air circulation. This minimized heat loss while still preventing condensation. During shoulder seasons, when outside temperatures were moderate, he opened the intake vent wider to bring in more fresh air and reduce interior temperatures when the thermal mass became too effective at heating the cabin. Spring testing revealed the dramatic effectiveness of the integrated ventilation system. Using a simple humidity gauge made from a bundle of dried wheat stalks that expanded and contracted with moisture levels, Novak measured interior humidity at 45% compared to 70% in Thomas Baker's unventilated cabin under identical conditions. More importantly, even during nights when exterior temperatures dropped to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, Novak's cabin showed no interior frost formation, while Baker's cabin developed ice on all exterior-facing walls. The fuel efficiency improvements were equally impressive. During a week-long cold spell in early April, when daytime temperatures reached 45 degrees but nights still dropped below freezing, Novak's controlled ventilation system prevented overheating during warm periods while maintaining comfortable temperatures during cold periods. He burned 1 3/4 cords of wood compared to Baker's 2 1/2 cords for equivalent comfort, a savings of 3/4 cord that represented significant labor and resource conservation. The heat recovery passage also solved the maintenance challenge of cleaning ash from the deep thermal mass. The airflow through the rear passage carried away fine ash particles that would otherwise accumulate in the masonry joints, keeping the heat transfer surfaces clean and efficient. Removable ash trays installed at the base of the passage collected debris that could be emptied monthly without disrupting the heating system's operation. By late spring, Novak had created an integrated heating and ventilation system that addressed every major weakness of frontier cabin comfort. The massive thermal platform stored heat, the labyrinth flue captured maximum energy from combustion gases, and the controlled ventilation system managed air quality and moisture without wasting thermal energy. The three components worked together as a unified system that maintained comfortable, healthy interior conditions using significantly less fuel than any conventional frontier heating method. Neighboring homesteaders began visiting regularly to observe and measure the performance differences, and several asked Novak to sketch plans for similar installations in their own cabins. The winter of 1880 arrived with a ferocity that tested every survival system in the northern Rocky Mountain Territory. An Arctic air mass settled over the region in late January and refused to move, bringing 15 consecutive days of temperatures below minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, accompanied by 40 inches of snow and wind chills that plunged to minus 40 degrees. The extreme conditions created a natural laboratory for comparing heating systems, as every cabin in the valley faced identical environmental stresses that would reveal the true performance differences between conventional and innovative approaches. Transportation networks collapsed under the sustained cold and heavy snow, cutting off the usual supply routes that brought split firewood from commercial timber operations. Thomas Baker, along with most conventional cabin owners, had calculated their fuel needs based on normal winter conditions and found themselves facing potential shortages when their straight flue systems demanded far more wood than anticipated. Baker burned through his entire winter wood supply in the first 10 days of the cold snap, forcing him to venture into dangerous conditions to cut green timber that burned poorly and produced excessive smoke. Margaret Collins faced even more severe challenges when her rebuilt conventional fireplace began showing stress fractures on the 7th day of extreme cold. The repeated thermal shock of intense fires, followed by rapid cooling when the firebox burned down, created expansion and contraction cycles that her masonry couldn't withstand. By day 10, she had developed a dangerous crack through her firebox wall that allowed hot gases to escape directly into her cabin's wooden framing, forcing her to abandon the heating system entirely and take shelter with neighbors. Novak's integrated system responded to the extreme test with remarkable stability. The massive thermal platform's embedded earth coupling provided a crucial advantage during the sustained cold period, as the deep foundation maintained its connection to stable ground temperatures even when surface conditions became extreme. This thermal anchoring prevented the dramatic temperature swings that destroyed conventional masonry and provided a steady baseline temperature that moderated the system's performance throughout the crisis. The heat recovery ventilation system proved essential during the prolonged cold spell, when opening doors or windows for fresh air would have been catastrophic for fuel conservation. Novak's controlled air circulation maintained interior air quality without losing precious thermal energy, allowing him to keep his cabin sealed against the extreme conditions while preventing the moisture buildup and stagnation that plagued neighbors' emergency heating efforts. The system's ability to manage both temperature and air quality simultaneously became critical when survival depended on maximizing efficiency from every piece of available fuel. Daily temperature logging during the crisis revealed the dramatic performance gap between heating approaches. Using a mercury thermometer that he checked at dawn, noon, and midnight, Novak recorded interior temperatures that never dropped below 35 degrees Fahrenheit, even during the coldest nights when exterior temperatures reached minus 30 degrees. His system maintained this performance while consuming approximately 2 cords of seasoned wood over the 10-day period, fuel that he had split and stored during the previous autumn, according to his systematic approach to winter preparation. Baker's conventional system, by contrast, struggled to maintain interior temperatures above 10 degrees Fahrenheit during the worst nights, despite burning nearly 3 cords of wood in the same period. The fuel consumption difference became even more significant when transportation difficulties made additional wood supplies unavailable at any price. Several conventional cabin owners, including Collins and Samuel Morrison, were forced to burn furniture, fence posts, and even structural elements from outbuildings to maintain minimal heating during the final days of the cold snap. The stress testing revealed crucial insights about thermal mass behavior under extreme conditions. Novak discovered that his massive brick platform actually improved its performance during sustained cold periods, as the deep thermal mass took several days to fully saturate with heat, but once saturated, it provided increasingly stable temperature regulation. The Labyrinth flue system showed similar improvements under heavy use, as the extended hot gas pathways became more efficient when operated continuously rather than intermittently. William Harper, the county road overseer who had initially dismissed Novak's techniques as impractical immigrant nonsense, visited during the cold snap's final days to personally measure and document the performance differences. Using his own surveying instruments, Harper recorded interior temperatures, fuel consumption rates, and structural condition in multiple cabins throughout the valley. His official measurements confirmed Novak's claims. The integrated heating system maintained comfortable living conditions using approximately 30% less fuel than conventional approaches, while showing no signs of the thermal stress damage that had affected several standard installations. The documentation process that Harper initiated became crucial for the broader adoption of Novak's techniques. As county overseer, Harper possessed the authority to recommend building standards for new homestead construction, and his detailed measurements during the extreme weather event provided objective data that skeptical builders couldn't dismiss. His written report, filed with the Territorial Building Commission in Helena, included precise fuel consumption figures, temperature maintenance records, and structural integrity assessments that demonstrated the superior performance of integrated masonry heating systems. By spring, word of the winter's natural experiment had spread throughout the territory's building community. The local brick supply merchant reported increased orders for the heavy-duty fire bricks needed for double-withe construction, and several experienced masons traveled to examine Novak's installation firsthand. Chief Squilha, who had contributed crucial indigenous knowledge to the system's development, found himself consulting with other homesteaders who wanted to incorporate earth coupling and passive ventilation techniques into their own heating projects. The institutional validation accelerated when Henry Wilkinson, the territorial building surveyor, conducted his annual inspection tour in late 1880. Wilkinson documented significantly fewer fire-related structural failures among cabins that had adopted elements of Novak's integrated approach compared to a measurable increase in thermal stress damage among conventional installations that had been pushed beyond their design limits during the extreme winter. The Territorial Building Commission's 1881 manual, distributed to every land office in Montana, included for the first time official recommendations for enhanced masonry mass, controlled flue pathways, and integrated ventilation systems in frontier construction. The manual cited specific performance data from the winter of 1880, acknowledging that traditional European and indigenous building wisdom offered proven solutions to frontier heating challenges that American builders had been too quick to abandon. Novak's quiet rebellion against frontier building orthodoxy had evolved into accepted best practice, validated by measurable performance under the most demanding conditions that the Northern Rocky Mountain Territory could provide.